Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 13 of Fireside Stories, The Man in Black, A Tale of Darkness and Survival. Catherine had been working on overdrive for about a month, struggling to finish the code before the impending deadline. Fixing bugs was more critical for her supervisor than human sustenance, and meals were skipped several times. Catherine let out a sigh, relieved the code was finished. The clock read 01:30 when she finally left the office. Walking home, a sense of unease came over her. She looked over her shoulder to see a tall and imposing figure. His broad shoulders and lean muscular frame suggested he was physically powerful. His face was obscured by a black hood. His eyes glinted with a sinister intelligence that made Catherine's skin crawl. The man's clothing was entirely black, from his hooded robes to his boots. His outfit was form-fitting, accentuating his athletic build, and the fabric seemed to ripple and flow around him as if it had a life of its own. Despite the darkness of his attire, the man in black seemed to radiate an otherworldly energy that made him stand out in the dimly lit alleyway. His movements were fluid, seeming to glide rather than walk, as if he were floating just above the ground. Catherine couldn't help but feel that he wasn't entirely human. The thought sent shivers down her spine. She quickened her pace, but the man kept getting closer, sending Catherine into a panic. She tried calling for help, but her phone was dead. She took out a bottle of pepper spray and turned around to confront the man, but he was nowhere to be seen. Catherine was relieved, but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Arriving home and rummaging through her purse, she realized she had left her keys back at the office. She rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. She wasn't worried about waking her partner, Amy. Amy should be home soon, so Catherine decided to wait. Sitting on the doorstep, Catherine heard noises inside the house, like someone was walking around upstairs. Catherine's heart was pounding, and her palms were sweaty. She was wondering if the man in black had gotten into her house. She tried to rationalize the situation, thinking that maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Amy finally arrived home. They searched the entire apartment as Catherine explained what had happened. Not finding anything out of the ordinary, Catherine tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but she couldn't. She felt like someone was watching her. Noises, footsteps, and whispers would echo through the silent apartment every night. Catherine's behavior started to change, becoming more withdrawn and paranoid. She stopped going out at night, refused to open the windows, and locked all the doors. Amy tried to comfort her, but Catherine didn't want to listen, convinced that something was after her. One day, Amy came home to find the house in complete disarray. Furniture had been overturned and objects were scattered everywhere. Catherine was nowhere to be seen. Amy panicked and called the police. They searched the entire apartment but found no sign of Catherine. Days turned into weeks, and Catherine's disappearance remained a mystery. Amy was devastated and felt guilty for not being able to help her. One night, as Amy was lying in bed, she heard a faint whisper in her ear. The murmur grew louder, and she realized it was Catherine's voice. It was soft, but unmistakable.
"He's still here,"
Catherine whispered.
"He's been watching us all this time."
Amy was terrified. She tried to call out to Catherine, but there was no response. The whispering stopped, and everything fell silent. Amy tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the feeling in her stomach contradicted that thought. Weeks dragged on, and unnatural things began to occur around the house. Objects began moving on their own, and the hallway floorboards creaked at night. Amy started to feel like she was going insane. She tried to seek help, but nobody believed her. They thought she was just traumatized by Catherine's disappearance. Amy felt a cold breeze across her face while lying in bed. She opened her eyes and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was the man in black, with a malicious grin on his face. Amy tried screaming, but nothing came out. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching her. Paralyzed with fear, Amy couldn't move. The man in black took a step closer. The streetlight outside her window reflected off the knife in his hand. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst. But when she opened them again, the man was gone. Amy sat up, heart pounding, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. She couldn't shake the feeling the man was still there, keeping an eye on her. As the days passed, Amy's behavior became increasingly erratic. She stopped going to work, stopped eating, and stopped sleeping. She locked herself in the bedroom and obsessively searched for clues about Catherine's disappearance. Flipping through the pages of Catherine's journal, she finally found something. It was a cryptic message that read,
He's been following me for months. I can feel him watching me, even though nobody's there. He whispers to me at night, telling me to do things. I'm scared, and I don't know what to do.
Amy's hands were shaking after reading the message. She couldn't believe that Catherine had been going through this all along. That's when a horrific thought came to mind. The man in black wasn't just after herself. He was after both of them. He had been watching, studying, and manipulating them. He had driven Catherine to madness and now was coming after Amy. Amy packed a bag and left the apartment, not daring to look back. She spent the next few days staying with friends, constantly looking over her shoulder, never staying in one place for too long. But the man in black was always one step ahead of her. He would leave cryptic messages on her wall and toy with her mind. She felt like she was losing her sanity and didn't know how much longer she could hold on. After days of running, Amy stood lost, tired, and scared in a damp alleyway. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, expecting to see the man in black, and saw Catherine. Catherine looked horrible. Her hair was matted, her clothes shredded, and a haunted look emanated from her eyes. Holding a knife, a twisted smile formed in the corner of her mouth. Amy tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Catherine walked toward her corrupt smile growing wider with each step.
I did what he told me to do.
Catherine whispered.
I did it for us.
Thoughts raced through Amy's mind, unable to comprehend what Catherine was saying. She had to get out of there before it was too late. Suddenly, Catherine lunged at Amy, knocking her to the ground. Catherine stood over Amy, slowly raising the knife. Amy closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Seconds slowly ticked by. Amy opens her eyes to see Catherine slumped over, tears pouring from her eyes. The knife slides from Catherine's grip and falls to the ground. Amy crawls out from beneath Catherine, stands up, and embraces her. Catherine sobs uncontrollably. Amy started to lead her out of the alleyway when a cold breeze blew across her neck. She turned around and saw the man in black standing in the shadows, watching her with a wicked grin. Amy took a deep breath and stared back at him, refusing to be intimidated.
You can't keep doing this,
she said firmly.
I won't let you take control of me like you did with Catherine.
The man in black chuckled.
Oh, but I already have,
he said.
I've been manipulating you since you moved in with her. You were always just pawns in my game.
Amy felt a surge of anger. She refused to believe she had been under his control this whole time. She squared up her shoulders and took a step toward him.
Well, we're taking back control,
she said.
I won't let you destroy our life. We are stronger than you think.
The man in black's grin faded, and he took a step back. Amy could see fear in his eyes, giving her a sense of power she had never felt before. She turned and walked away, leaving the man in black behind. Walking down the street, she felt a sense of liberation. She had faced their demons and come out on top. She knew that she and Catherine still had a long way to go before they fully recovered from the trauma. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they had a fighting chance. Amy never found out who the man in black was or why he had targeted her and Catherine, but she didn't care. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who live inside our heads, and she had defeated theirs. Years later, Amy and Catherine would reflect on those events as a turning point in their lives, shuddering at the memories of fear, madness, and a sense of hopelessness. But the strength, resilience, and courage that had allowed them to overcome it all reminded them that they are survivors. Now, if you enjoyed that story, make sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to stay in the loop for future Fireside stories.